The great chamber of the Galactic Council was a place of quiet harmony. Light from 1,000 stars filtered through the crystalline dome, casting soft patterns on the floor. Delegates from 100 peaceful species floated or perched at their stations, their conversations a gentle hum. There were no sharp noises here, no sudden movements. It was the heart of a civilization built on stability, on worlds where the weather was mild and the gravity gentle. This peace was shattered when the Viridian delegation arrived. They were insectoid, with delicate green carapaces and large, multifaceted eyes that usually glowed with calm. Today, those eyes were dim with fear. They moved with a frantic clicking of limbs, their translator devices buzzing with distress. The head ambassador, a being named Calyx, took the central platform. Its voice, usually a soft chitter, was strained. "Esteemed Council," it began, the words echoing in the suddenly silent chamber. "We come before you not with a request, but with a plea for our very survival." A holographic display bloomed above the platform. It showed a world of breathtaking beauty, emerald forests, silver rivers, and vast, peaceful oceans. This was Viridia Prime, their primary colony. Then the image changed. A shadow fell over the planet. It was not a natural shadow. It was a fleet of angular, jagged ships that seemed to be made of dark crystal. They were the Krath. The sensor logs played. The Krath ships descended, not firing weapons, but deploying strange, pulsing beams into the planet's crust. The Viridian cities went dark. The lush forests began to wither, their life energy visibly drained in ghostly streams of light pulled into the Krath harvesters. The Krath themselves were seen for the first time, beings of shifting, geometric crystal, absorbing the stolen energy, growing brighter as the world below grew dimmer. "We have no weapons to fight them," Calyx pleaded, its body trembling. "Our energy projectors pass through them. Our ship's weapons are useless. They consume the very power of a world. They leave only dust and cold stone." A murmur of alarm went through the council. The Selene, a race of proud aquatic warriors, projected their commander's image. "We will dispatch a battle fleet immediately. The Krath will fall to Selene fury." The Selene fleet, sleek and powerful, arrived at Viridia Prime within hours. The council watched the live feed. The Selene ships fired volleys of brilliant plasma. The energy bolts struck the Krath vessels and did nothing. The crystalline hulls absorbed the plasma, shimmering briefly before firing back with concentrated beams of the same stolen energy. Selene ships shattered like glass. The attack lasted minutes. The Krath harvesters did not even slow their work. Next, the Turk, heavy gravity bipeds known for their toughness, tried. They used massive kinetic bombardments, but their projectiles, designed for other purposes, were too slow. The Krath ships, sensing the incoming matter, emitted a field that vaporized the Turk missiles into harmless energy, which they then absorbed. The Turk commander, his face a mask of fury and shame, reported failure. "They turn our strength into their food," he growled. One by one, the warrior species of the Federation tried, and one by one they failed. The Krath were not just winning. They were being fed by the attacks. Despair filled the council chamber. The Viridian ambassador watched its home being consumed, its people's energy signatures fading from the scanners. It was a slow, terrifying death for an entire world. Calyx let out a sound that no translator could convert, a raw, mournful keen of absolute loss. It addressed the council a final time, its voice hollow. "Is there no one? No species in all the vastness of the Federation who can stand against this? We beg of you, if there is any power, any knowledge, any hidden strength, please, help us." The plea hung in the air, a final fading echo of hope. The delegates looked at each other, but no one spoke. There was no more help to give. The rules of their civilized universe had no answer for the KRATH. God, it was then that a signal cut through the standard council channels. It was on an old frequency, one used for deep space emergencies, crackling with static as if from a great distance. Galactic Council. This is human vessel Giamma on the hidden channel. We have heard the Viridian plea. The voice was male, calm, but with a rough edge, unlike the smooth tones of the Federation translators. It spoke in clear, if slightly accented, galactic standard. A flurry of confusion erupted. Human? What is a human? What species code is that? From which system? How are they on this channel? The voice continued, ignoring the chaos. Our data matches the Krath profile. We have a kinetic solution. Do not, I repeat, do not fire on the 3 vessels now approaching Viridia Prime's outer marker. We are there to engage. Sensors across the Council fleet switched focus. Near the edge of the star system, space itself seemed to tear. It was not the clean, elegant rift of Federation drives. This was a violent, ragged puncture in reality. From it emerged 3 ships. The Federation observers stared. These were not starships as they knew them. They were ugly, functional things. Their hulls were not smooth ceramo metal, but a patchwork of thick, super-dense alloy plates, bolted and welded together. They had no graceful lines, only hard angles and blocky shapes. They looked less like vessels, and more like flying fortresses, built not for beauty or speed, but to withstand unimaginable punishment. Small, heavily shielded ports dotted their surface, and crude but massive chemical booster arrays glowed with dull heat at their stern. They moved with a slow, deliberate power that spoke of immense mass. By the ancient stars, whispered a Turk engineer, analyzing the scans. The density readings. They're impossible. Those ships shouldn't be able to move. The gravity stress on any living thing inside. The 3 human ships formed a tight, precise triangle. Their designations appeared on the scanners. Giamma, Baiko, Mago. They made no further communication. They simply began moving towards Viridia Prime, their engines flaring with a simple, fiery propulsion that seemed centuries behind Federation technology. They did not request permission. They did not identify their homeworld. They just advanced. In the council chamber. The silence was absolute. The Viridian ambassador, Calyx, watched the crude vessels on the screen, a faint, desperate ember of hope flickering in its large eyes. Who were these beings? Where did they come from? And what could their kinetic solution possibly do where the finest weapons of the Federation had failed? The humans, the so-called Deathworlders, had finally answered the call. And as their shadow fell over the battle, the galaxy held its breath, waiting to see if their emergence was a miracle or a final terrible mistake. The bridge of the Giamma was quiet, but it was the quiet of deep focus, not peace. The air hummed with power from old-fashioned fission reactors and the low vibration of massive gravity generators. Screens flickered with data, their light reflecting off the worn metal surfaces. In the center of it all, Commander Lee Jun sat in his command chair, his eyes fixed on the main viewer. It showed the beautiful, dying world of Viridia Prime and the dark. Angular shapes of the Krath harvesters circling it like vultures. Jun was a man who looked like he was carved from the same tough material as his ship. His face was calm, but there were lines around his eyes that spoke of long strain. His knuckles, resting on the arm of his chair, were marked with old scars. He watched the Federation fleet hanging back, their beautiful ships now just spectators. His second officer, Lieutenant Park Soo-min, worked at a console nearby. Her movements were quick and precise. She monitored the Krath energy signatures, her brow furrowed. "Commander," she said, her voice clear in the quiet room. "The Krath shields are exactly as our deep-range listeners predicted. They are perfect energy dissipators. They can absorb and redirect any directed energy weapon. Plasma, lasers, particle beams. It only makes them stronger. June nodded slowly. And their physical structure? Su Min brought up a rotating model of a craft harvester. The crystalline lattice is incredibly hard, but our simulations show it has a weakness to sudden, extreme kinetic impact. It doesn't bend. It shatters. That is our confirmation, June said, his voice low and steady. Kinetic solution only. No energy weapons at all. Power down all external emitters. Switch to projectile targeting and manual ballistic control. Across the void, on the bridge of the Baiko, Captain Kim Tae-shik cracked his neck and grinned. He was a different sort of man than June brought her, with an energy that seemed barely contained. His ship was the spear point. "Listen up, my lovely brute," he muttered, patting the console of his ship. "No fancy lights today. Just one good punch." On the Mago, Engineer Choi Minji was already deep in the engine room, her world one of roaring machinery and heat. She moved between the massive reactor columns, checking the welds on the booster housings. Her face was smudged with grime, but her eyes were sharp. The Mago was their shield, designed to take a hit so the others could deliver one. She knew her job was the most dangerous. She checked the emergency core ejection charges for the third time. The humans had not been idle in their hidden years. Since the first, confusing galactic broadcasts had reached Earth centuries ago, they had listened. They had learned the language, studied the cultures, and mapped the politics. They had quickly understood one terrifying truth. The galaxy was afraid of them. A Federation anthropological survey, never meant for human ears, had been intercepted. The report on Earth was chillingly clinical. Designation: Sol 3. Classification: Deathworld, Extreme. Factors include gravity 9.8 meters per second squared, Class 5 hazardous, axial tilt variance, extreme seasonal violence, tectonic activity, constant, lethal, atmospheric composition, corrosive, storm generating, biosphere hyper-aggressive, predatory dominance. Native sentient species, humans, exhibit terrifying survival traits, extreme physical resilience, rampant cellular repair, a psychotic immune system, and a psychological predisposition for conflict and problem-solving through applied violence. Recommend: quarantine. Any contact risks cultural contamination and potential galactic-scale destabilization. They had been labeled monsters in a report, filed away and forgotten. So humanity made a choice. They would hide. They would build their ships in the dark, on the far side of their own moon, in the asteroids. They would develop technology not for grace, but for pure, brutal survival. They would turn their deadly home into their greatest teacher. Li Jun remembered the training. Running in double Earth gravity. Surviving in simulated alien environments that were, to him, often less hostile than a bad day in the Himalayas or the Amazon. Learning to fix a broken bone in the field, to endure pain, to keep fighting when everything was broken. They were not warriors by galactic standards. They were survivors. And survival, on Earth, often meant being the most dangerous thing in the room. "Commander," Su Min said, pulling him back. "The lead craft harvester is moving into optimal firing position over the Viridian primary energy ley line. If it anchors, the planet's core drain will be irreversible in hours." June leaned forward. "Open a channel to the Baiko and Mago." The faces of Kim Tae-shik and Choi Min-ji appeared on his screen. Min-ji was still in the engine room, a wrench in her hand. Tae-shik was strapped into his pilot's harness, looking eager. "Plan is simple," Jun said. "No wasted words. The Federation failed because they tried to fight with what the craft eat. We will fight with what they cannot understand. Baiko, you have the shot." Mago, you cover her flank. We will draw secondary attention. Remember, no energy signatures. They are blind to simple mass. Let's show them the weight of a death world. Taishik's grin widened. With pleasure, Commander. Minji nodded firmly. Reactors are green. Containment fields at maximum. We are ready. June switched the viewer to show the craft ship. It was beginning to glow from below, a sickly light being pulled from the planet. He thought of the Viridians, so fragile, watching their world die. He thought of the cold, clinical words of the Federation report. Psychotic immune system. Predatory dominance. Maybe they were right. But today, the galaxy needed a predator. It needed a monster to fight a bigger monster. All stations, prepare for combat, June said, his voice still calm. This is what we prepared for. This is why we endured. Let's go to work. The Giamma, Baiko, and Mago powered up their final approach drives. They moved not with the silent glide of Federation ships, but with the thunderous roar of controlled explosions, fire and smoke billowing from their boosters in a way that seemed primitive and terrifying to the watching galaxy. They were not hiding anymore. 3 ships, built in shadow, were now flying straight into the light of a dying star, ready to fight with the simplest, oldest tools in the universe: mass, velocity, and an absolute refusal to die. The 3 human ships entered the engagement zone. The craft harvesters took notice. To the crystalline beings, these new vessels were dark spots against the star field, confusing, silent voids that emitted no tasty energy signature. They were anomalies. A smaller craft vessel, a sharp-edged fighter, broke from the main group to investigate. It pulsed a scanning beam towards the Giamma. On the bridge, Li Jun watched the beam wash over them. Hold position, he said. Let them look. They'll see nothing but rock and metal. The craft fighter, receiving no feedback it understood, fired a testing lance of green energy. It was a low-powered shot, meant to probe and taste. The beam struck the Giamma's thick, angled hull. Where Federation shielding would have flared and buckled, the human ship simply absorbed the hit. Super-dense ceramic plating blackened and vaporized in a small patch, but the beam did not penetrate. It was like throwing a cup of water at a mountain. Minimal damage, reported Park Soo-min. No system penetration. The craft fighter seemed puzzled. It moved closer. Now, June said dot from the side of the Giamma. A series of ports slid open silently. Not energy weapon barrels, but simple magnetic launch rails. With a series of deep, resonant thumps that vibrated through the ship's frame, 6 projectiles were ejected into the vacuum. They were not guided missiles with plasma warheads. They were solid tungsten rods, 20 feet long and as thick as a tree trunk. Their surfaces were rough, unadorned metal. For a second, they drifted. Then, secondary chemical boosters on their rear flared to life, fireless in the void, but throwing out plumes of gas. They accelerated. Fast. The craft fighter had no protocol for this. It registered the objects as simple mass. Its shields, tuned to dissipate energy, did nothing. The first rod struck it head-on. There was no colorful explosion. There was a flash of incredible kinetic energy, converting into heat and light upon impact. The crystalline fighter did not explode. It disintegrated. It shattered into a million glittering fragments, bursting outward in a cloud of silent, deadly shrapnel. The remaining rods shot through the cloud, continuing on towards the larger harvester. The Galactic Council feed, watched by billions, went silent for a full 3 seconds. Then, chaos erupted in every language. They had just watched a craft vessel be destroyed, not by a superior weapon, but by a primitive lump of metal thrown very, very hard. On the Baiko, Kim Tae-shik whooped. That got their attention. My turn. The lead craft harvester was now orienting towards the human ships, a deep, angry glow building in its core stolen planetary energy, ready to be fired back as a weapon. Tashik's fingers danced over his console. The Baiko was the hammer. Its main weapon was not a single railgun, but a massive spinning magnetic accelerator that ran half the length of the ship. It took immense power to charge, power they had stored in old-fashioned capacitance banks, not easily detectable energy fields. Target locked. Firing solution is green. Eat this, you shiny parasite. Tashik muttered. He hit the final trigger. The Baiko shuddered from its core. A single, much larger projectile launched. It was a depleted uranium dart, shaped like a giant needle. Its boosters fired, then fell away. It crossed the distance, not at the speed of light, but at a significant fraction of it, a terrifying fraction that made relativity itself a weapon. The craft harvester fired its colossal energy beam. The green lance of devoured life, capable of vaporizing a Federation cruiser, intersected the path of the human projectile and did nothing to it. The beam washed over the dense, physical dart. It heated the surface to incandescence, but it could not stop its momentum. The laws of physics were unforgiving. The dart, trailing superheated plasma like a comet, struck the central nexus of the craft harvester. The result was not a shatter, but a rupture. The kinetic energy was so immense, it bypassed brittle fracture and simply vaporized the point of impact, creating a shockwave that traveled through the crystalline lattice. The harvester came apart in huge, jagged chunks, the glow within it flickering and dying. A silent, monumental firework of broken crystal and extinguished light. On the surface of Viridia Prime, in a shallow bunker, a group of Viridian elders huddled. They saw the shadow of the harvester above them vanish. They saw the rain of dead crystal begin to fall, burning up in the atmosphere. Their large eyes reflected the strange, hard light of the human's violence. They did not cheer. They trembled. This was salvation, but it was a savage, terrifying salvation. Now, the craft swarm reacted. They were not intelligent in a way humans understood, but they were adaptive. They identified the human ships as a physical threat. They stopped trying to use energy beams and instead moved to ram, their sharp crystalline spires aimed at the human hulls. Close quarters defense pattern. June ordered. The human ships, ungainly at a distance, moved with shocking, brutal agility at close range. Their thrusters, vents of raw explosive force, fired in rapid bursts, throwing them into spins and dodges that would have turned any Federation crew into paste inside their suits. The Mago slid between a charging craft ship and the Giamma. It took the impact on its reinforced flank. The sound was a cathedral bell ringing in hell, a deep, deafening gong that echoed through the ship. In the engine room of the Mago, Choi Min-ji was thrown from her feet. Alarm screamed. A support beam buckled above a reactor column. She saw a hairline crack forming in the primary containment shield. Cold fear, sharper than any blade, shot through her. A breach here would not just kill them. It would vaporize the Mago, and possibly the Giamma nearby. Containment failure on Reactor 2. She yelled into her comms, scrambling up. She didn't wait for orders. She grabbed a manual sealing kit and a handheld torch. The crack was hissing, emitting a dangerous blue glow. The automatic systems were damaged. It had to be done by hand. On the bridge of the Giamma, June saw the Mago's distress signal. He also saw 3 more craft ships vectoring towards her, confused by the lack of energy fire, but sensing a wounded target. Cover the Mago. He barked. All point defense batteries free fire. Use the fragmentation shot. Smaller, rapid-fire railguns emerged from ports on the Giamma and Baiko. They fired clouds of high-velocity metal shards. It was like firing a cosmic shotgun. The shards pinged and cracked against the Krath hulls, not destroying them, but chipping away, confusing their sensors, and slowing their advance. Inside the Mago's reactor room, the heat was becoming unbearable. Minji welded the crack, her hands steady despite the vibrations, threatening to shake her apart. The light from the breach was blinding. She finished the seal, slapped the emergency patch over it, and stumbled back. "Seal is holding," she gasped into her comm. "But it's unstable. We need to shut this core down in 3 minutes, or it goes critical." "Understood, Minji," came the voice of the Mago's captain, tight with strain. "We're buying you time." June watched the tactical screen. The Krath were learning. They were trying to surround the humans, to trap them. They were beginning to understand that these strange, heavy, quiet ships could only fight in one direction at a time. The humans were winning the blows, but they were 3 against a swarm. The first shocking victory was over. Now came the grinding, brutal work of survival. A work that every human on those ships had been born and trained for. They had drawn the monster's attention. Now they had to survive its teeth. The battle dissolved into a brutal, close-quarters brawl. The human ships, like 3 battered bears surrounded by a pack of crystalline wolves, could not run. They had to stand and fight. The Krath, now understanding the threat came from physical impact, stopped firing energy beams. Instead, they swarmed, using their sharp, hard bodies as rams and lances. Aboard the Mago, the situation was most desperate. The patched reactor was a ticking bomb. Captain Kim Yong from the Mago spoke over the fleet channel, his voice grim. "We must eject the core or lose the ship. But the ejection path is blocked by Krath vessels. We need a clearing." On the Giama, Li Jun didn't hesitate. "Baiko, concentrate fire on Sector 7. Clear a path for the Mago. We will draw the swarm to us." The Baiko, nimble for its mass, spun and unleashed another volley of its smaller tungsten rods. They speared through 2 Krath ships, shattering them. A narrow tunnel of space opened for a moment. It was all the chance the Mago needed. In the shuddering, overheated engine room, Choi Minji knew the procedure by heart. The core ejection was a manual, last-resort action. She moved to the towering, unstable reactor column. The control panel was dark, fried from the impact. It had to be done the old way. She pulled open a heavy metal hatch, revealing a series of physical lever locks and a single red-painted trigger. "I am at the manual eject," she reported, her voice calm. "Minji, get clear." Yong ordered. "There's no time for the automatic sequence," she said, her hands already moving. She released the magnetic clamps. A deep groan echoed through the ship. "The core is loose." Firing ejection charge in 3-2 a second. Tremendous impact rocked the Mago. A Krath ship had slipped past the covering fire and slammed into the engineering hull. The lights died, replaced by spinning red emergency beacons. Minji was thrown against the levers. She heard a sickening crack, not from the ship, but from her own leg. White-hot pain shot through her. The ejection trigger was just out of reach. On the bridge, the Mago system showed the core was loose, but still in the bay. The Krath ship was wedged against the hull, blocking the ejection port. In 60 seconds, it would go critical. Minji saw the numbers flashing on her wrist monitor. She saw the blocked port on a cracked screen above her. She knew the physics. A critical breach would kill her instantly. But a controlled directional explosion from the ejection charge might just clear the Krath wreckage and save the ship. If she could reach the trigger. Gritting her teeth, she dragged herself forward, ignoring the screaming pain in her leg. Every inch was agony. Her fingers stretched. She could see the big red button. The countdown on her wrist reached 10 seconds. "Forgive me, Mother," she whispered. And with a final desperate surge, She slammed her palm down on the trigger. A series of controlled explosions detonated along the ejection channel. The force blew the damaged craft ship clear, a cloud of shattered crystal. It also blew the entire rear section of the Mago, including the reactor bay, into space. The core, now free, shot out on a trail of fire before detonating harmlessly in the distance in a silent, bright flare. The Mago was alive, but crippled, trailing debris and atmosphere. And Choi Min-ji was gone. On the Giamma, Jun saw the data. He closed his eyes for a single hard second. A good person, a brilliant engineer, was gone, sacrificed to save her crew. He opened his eyes, and they were harder than before. All power to forward guns. For Min-ji, while the space battle raged, a new phase began. The craft had deployed ground units to protect their main energy siphon anchors on the planet's surface. They were like walking crystals, firing draining beams that withered all life around them. Sergeant Kang Dae-hyun, Jun's voice came over the ground team channel. You are clear for drop. Objective: destroy the anchor emplacements at the primary ley line nexus. Yes. Sir, came the reply. From the belly of the Giamma, 3 heavy drop pods fired, streaking down through the Viridian atmosphere like meteors. They hit the ground not with grace, but with ear-splitting craters. The hatches blew open, and the humans emerged dot to the watching Viridians hiding in the ruins of their city. They were mythical monsters made real. They wore powered armor, but it was not sleek. It was thick, angular, and covered in manual bolt heads and ceramic plates. It moved with a heavy, ground-shaking thud with each step. Sergeant Kang Dae-hyun took point, his rifle a weapon that fired solid slugs cracking as he put a round through the central lens of a craft walker. It stumbled and fell, but the craft were numerous. A draining beam clipped one human soldier, and even through the armor, they saw his vital signs crash before he could roll to cover. He didn't get up. Kang ordered his 2 remaining soldiers to flank a key anchor structure. He provided covering fire, his rifle booming in the strange, quiet alien jungle. He sprinted across a clearing to plant an explosive charge. As he slapped the magnetized block onto the anchor's base, a craft walker, hiding in the foliage, fired at the ground beneath him. The energy didn't hit him directly, but it vaporized the rock and soil. The ground gave way. A huge piece of the crystal infrastructure, weakened by the blast, sheared off and collapsed on top of him. It pinned his leg and lower torso to the ground. A searing pain told him his femur was broken, maybe his pelvis. He couldn't move. Sergeant is down. One of his soldiers yelled over the comms. Kang tried to push, but the weight was immense. Forget me. Set the secondary charge and blow the anchor. That's the mission. He watched his soldiers fight their way forward. He felt a strange calm. He had done his job. This was a good world, a gentle world. Dying here to save it was better than dying in some earth alley. He prepared to give the final order to detonate. Then he saw movement. Small, delicate movements. From behind a fallen log, a group of Viridians emerged. They were no taller than his chest, their green carapaces shimmering with fear. They saw the giant human trapped, saw the craftwalker turning towards them. They clicked, and CHITTE Red Dot 1, bolder than the rest, skittered forward. It was small enough to navigate the rubble of crystal that Kang could not. It reached his pinned leg. It looked at the massive piece of debris, then at its companions. It made a series of quick, sharp sounds. More Viridians appeared. They did not have strength, but they had numbers, and they had a purpose. They swarmed over the crystal slab. They found tiny cracks and fissures. They inserted long, strong pieces of native wood, using them as levers. Dozens of them pushed and pulled in unison, A coordinated effort of pure will docked to Kong. The weight shifted, just a fraction. Then a little more. "Keep going," he grunted, though they couldn't understand him. With a final, collective effort from the fragile aliens, a massive crystal slab tilted. Just enough. Kong, summoning every ounce of his Deathworlder strength, dragged his broken body free. He looked at the Viridian who had led the effort. He gave a single slow nod. The Viridian clicked softly, its large eyes reflecting the human's pained face. Kong grabbed his rifle. "Detonate charges now." His soldier hit the trigger. The anchor structure exploded in a shower of inert crystal. The draining beam from the sky flickered and died in space. The loss of the ground anchor disrupted the craft formation. Their coordination faltered. Seizing the moment, the Giamma and Baiko pressed their attack with renewed, furious intensity. The battle was turning, but the cost was being counted in real time. In the cold silence of space and in the mud of an alien world, humans and aliens were learning the same terrible, beautiful lesson. Survival had a price, and sometimes the fragile and the strong had to pay it together. The turning point was not a loud one. It was a silent failure in the Krath swarm mind. With their primary ground anchor shattered by Kong De Hyon and the Viridians, the energy drain on the planet stuttered. The Krath ships, suddenly cut off from a steady stream of nourishment, grew sluggish. Their crystalline movements, once sharp and certain, became confused. The silent, terrifying coordination began to break down. Li Jun saw it on his tactical screen. The red hostile markers were no longer moving in a unified pattern. They were drifting, turning in place, as if lost. "They're disoriented," Park Soo-min reported, her voice tinged with exhausted hope. "The planet's energy field is stabilizing. They're starving." On the Baiko, Kim Tae-shik saw a Krath harvester turning its blind, faceless front towards his ship, but no attack came. "They're running on empty," he said, a fierce grin spreading across his face. He didn't waste the moment. "Finishing moves, people. Target their propulsion clusters. Let's send them home in pieces." The human ships, battered but relentless, went on the offensive. The Giamma and Baiko moved with a final weary purpose. Their raildens, barrels glowing hot, fired again and again. Now, instead of trying to shatter the main bodies, they aimed for the glowing crystal nodes at the rear of each Krath vessel. Without the massive kinetic punches needed to break the core, these were surgical strikes. A tungsten rod would strike a propulsion node, and the Krath ship would spin away, dark and dead, into the void. One by one, then in groups, the Krath harvesters broke off. They did not retreat in formation. They fled, scattering into the deeper dark, seeking an easier, gentler world to consume. The last of them vanished into a ragged rift, leaving behind only the glittering field of broken crystal that had once been their fleet. Silence returned to the space around Viridia Prime. A heavy, bruised silence. The Giamma and Baiko hung beside the crippled Mago, which was venting slow streams of gas, but was structurally intact. The Federation fleet, which had watched the entire battle in stunned disbelief, remained at a distance. They did not approach. It was not fear of the Krath anymore. It was a new, profound uncertainty about the three brutal ships that had just rewritten the rules of war. On the surface, Sergeant Kang Dai-Hyen was being tended to by his soldiers. A Viridian, the one who had led the effort to free him, approached cautiously. It held a leaf filled with a cool, clean water. It offered it to the giant human. Kang, his face pale with pain, accepted it with a nod. He drank and handed it back. The Viridian made a soft, musical clicking sound. It was not a word he knew, but the meaning was clear. "Thank you." A day passed. The human ships performed emergency repairs. The Galactic Council, after much terrified debate, sent an envoy. They chose a diplomat from the Ellison, a species so delicate they communicated through subtle color changes in their frills. His name was Lurian. His ship, a small, graceful vessel like a blown glass bird, approached the Giamma. A request for docking and an audience was sent. Li Jun authorized it. He stood in the Giamma's main airlock bay, a space of bare metal and functional conduits. He wore a simple, dark-duty uniform, no decorations. He stood straight, but the weariness was in his shoulders, in his eyes. The airlock cycled. Rian entered, floating on a small anti-grav disc. His frills were pale, washed of color the sign of profound apprehension. He saw June and his small honor guard of 2 crew members. They looked solid, real. Their faces were not the smooth, elegant faces of the Federation. They had scars, lines, and a stillness that felt like contained force. Rian's translator device produced soft, fluting galactic standard. Commander Li Jun, on behalf of the Galactic Council and the Viridian people, we offer our profound gratitude. You have saved a world. Jun gave a small, slow bow. We answered a call. We are glad we could help. Lurian's frills twitched, a flutter of anxious yellow. Your methods? They were unexpected. Your ships. Your technology. It is not like anything in our records. We have no species code for human. Where is your home? Why have you remained hidden? June looked past the diplomat, at the battered interior of his ship, at the faces of his crew who had lost a friend. He looked back at Larain. We hid because we were told we were monsters. He spoke simply, without anger. A long time ago, we listened. We learned your languages, studied your worlds. We found a report. It called our home a death world. It said we were psychotic, violent, destabilizing. It said we should be quarantined. So we quarantined ourselves. We stayed in the shadows. Lurian's frills went completely white. Shock. We came out, June continued, his voice still quiet, because you needed a monster to fight a bigger monster. The Krath did not understand energy weapons, but they understood a rock thrown very hard. That is a simple lesson from a hard world. He gestured to a view screen that showed the planet below. It zoomed in. It showed Viridians and human soldiers working together. The humans, in their hulking armor, were moving debris. The Viridians were bringing them water, tending to small wounds. They were showing the humans which native plants were safe to touch. But we are not just that, June said, and for the first time, his voice softened. Our world tried to kill us every single day. It taught us how to fight, yes, how to endure. But it also taught us how precious life is when it is fragile, how important it is to stand for something more than just survival. He paused, thinking of Choi Min-ji sacrificing herself in the engine room, of Sergeant Kong being saved by creatures he could crush with one hand. We do not wish to be your monsters, June said, looking directly at Lyrian. But we cannot go back to the shadows. We heard your plea, and we answered. That is who we are. Rian was silent for a long time. The white slowly bled from his frills, replaced by a deep, thoughtful blue. He looked at the humans, really looked. He saw the grief for their lost crew member. He saw the careful way they moved around the delicate equipment in his own shuttle. He saw the truth in June's calm eyes. The Council. They are afraid, Lurian admitted. But they are also grateful. And they are not foolish. He took a breath. The Viridians have already submitted a formal petition. They request a permanent defense and cultural exchange treaty with your species, with humanity. They wish for you to be their guardians. June nodded slowly. We would be honored. The Council will ratify it, Lurian said, his frills now shimmering with a mixture of respect and awe soft silver. And with it, they will offer humanity a seat on the Galactic Council, not as a hidden people, not as monsters, but as themselves. The message went out across the Federation. The story of the three ugly ships, the brutal kinetics, the sacrifice, and the compassion. The story of the Deathworlders who emerged from the shadows not to conquer, but to protect. Aboard the Giamo, Li Jun stood on the bridge. The repairs were underway. The Mago would fly again. On the screen, a formal invitation from the Galactic Council gleamed with official seals. He looked at Park Soo-min, at Kim Tae-shik on the screen, at the crew who had faced the dark. Set a course, he said. Not to the hidden places, not to the shadows, but to the coordinates of the Galactic Council's home station. It's time we introduced ourselves properly. The three ships, scars and all, powered up their drives. They turned as one, no longer hiding, and moved towards the heart of the civilization that had once feared them. They were not a threat. They were a promise. A promise that when the galaxy cried out for help, even the darkest shadows might hold a friend. They were humanity, and they were finally coming home.